In previous videos, we've met some of Zorro's assets files, in particular the default assets file assetsfix.csv. Remember those files that live in the history folder of your Zorro installation? In this video, we'll explore these files in a little more detail, and I'll show you how you can use them to configure Zorro to simulate the trading conditions of a particular broker. These asset list files are a great example of how Zorro can really facilitate an efficient research process for time-poor independent traders. Normally, to ensure the accuracy of our backtests, we'd have to account for these trading conditions ourselves. But this is a tedious and cumbersome process. Thankfully, Zorro does nearly all the heavy lifting for us and leverages the power of automation to not only reduce or eliminate errors, but also to free us up to focus on doing actual research and development, not tinkering with the detail of our simulation engine. If you were writing a backtest in a professional environment, you'd have to deal with these things yourself. Zorro abstracts almost all the detail for us, so we can focus on the important things, like finding trading strategies that make money. As I've said before, Zorro is the ultimate productivity hack for independent traders. Before we get into it, I need to make clear some definitions. Trading conditions refer to the costs of trading a particular instrument with a particular broker, and include things like the spread, broker commission, the cost of margin, and other financing costs of holding various positions. Depending on the broker's pricing model, you'll often find that one set of conditions is more amenable to certain trading styles. For example, if you're doing long-term trading, you might find that your strategy is relatively immune to higher spreads, but is greatly impacted by the swap rate. That's the financing cost for holding an FX position, and depending on the instruments traded, swap rates can be both positive and negative. The assets files contain information about the trading conditions for your brokers, and by selecting different assets files, we can simulate the past performance of a strategy with different brokers. Note also that for over-the-counter products like FX, many brokers will have slightly different historical data feeds. Changing your simulated assets file doesn't change the data used to simulate a strategy, only the trading conditions. I'm making a point of this because any simulation, including a simulation of a trading strategy on past market data, is only a model of reality and will always deviate from that reality to some extent. We should accept this because it's a part of life, but we should also seek to understand where these deviations can come from. It's also important to note that trading conditions are read from the assets file while Zorro is in testing and training mode. In live trading, these parameters are usually loaded from the broker's API in real time. But this has an important caveat, because some brokers don't actually provide this information via their API, or they only provide incomplete information, in which case the missing values are read from the assets file. Interactive brokers is an example where only price and spread information is available. All the other parameters must be entered manually. Likewise, Oanda's API won't update swap rates, and these also need to be entered manually. In most cases, these parameters are available through a broker's API, which means that Zorro can access them for us. Oanda and interactive brokers are very much in the minority in this regard. As you'll see later, Zorro can even update the assets list files for us by just connecting to a broker and looping through the assets of interest. This is an incredibly convenient aspect of the software, and one that I'll demonstrate to you shortly. Let's open our assetsfix CSV file and take a look at the information it contains. We'll open it in a spreadsheet program to make viewing more comfortable, but you can also view it in a text editor. So recall that assetsfix is located in a history folder. and here it is here. You can see that each asset has its own line in the CSV file. And we can add new assets on new lines either manually or automatically. More on that shortly. Now, most of these fields can be updated automatically by connecting to a broker. And again, I'll show you how to do this shortly. But sometimes you'll need to enter certain values manually depending on what is available via an individual broker's API. Where that's an issue, you'll find it discussed in the video that shows you how to connect to that particular broker. So let's just run through each of these fields. The name field is the name of the instrument, and this is what Zorro looks for when you select an asset in the drop-down box on the Zorro interface or in a trading script. This can be a source of confusion because the name that we give to an instrument here doesn't necessarily have to match your broker's name for the same instrument. Your broker's name for the instrument can optionally be inserted in the symbol field here. Although this might seem a little confusing, this setup means that we can use a consistent naming convention in all our scripts. And then those names will automatically get matched to your broker's naming convention, provided you get the symbol field right. Trust me, a little bit of work in setting this up properly at the outset is far more efficient than the alternative. Just note that when filling in the name field, you can't use more than 15 characters, and likewise blanks and punctuation marks are not allowed, except for the / and underscore. Next, the price field is the ask price in units of the counter or quote currency. That's the second currency that appears in an exchange rate. For example, for the Euro-US dollar exchange rate, US dollar is the counter or quote currency. The euro is what's known as the base currency. For non-FX markets, such as equities, the units of the price field are the currency of the country in which the market is traded. And for those who may be new to the markets, an ask price is the price at which you can buy an instrument. In contrast, the bid price is the price at which you can sell. When a market is quoted as a bid-ask, you are generally seeing the current best bid and best ask prices. And the difference between the two is the spread. Now, this price field is actually not used at all in Zorro's simulations. It is there for information only. If you don't update your assets files regularly, you can find that the values in this field deviate from the current reality quite significantly. But that's actually not a really big deal. The spread field contains the difference between the bid and ask prices of an asset, again in units of the counter currency. Also, with regards to spread, by default, Zorro uses a constant value for spread in simulation. This is fine for some FX brokers who guarantee a fixed spread, but we're often faced with the reality of a variable spread. The fixed spread approximation is fine in most cases. However, it is a good idea to fill the spread field with a value that's on the pessimistic end of the expected range for an asset. If you have reason to believe a strategy will usually find itself trading during periods where spread is on the lower end of the range, you can set a value for spread in the script itself, which will override the value here. Finally, for some higher frequency strategies, a fixed estimate of spread just won't do, and we would be much better served to use the actual variable spread that existed historically. I'll show you how to set this up in another video. The roll long and roll short fields represent the financing costs of holding one contract, one stock, or 0.1 or 1/10 of a standard FX lot in the units of the account currency. These financing costs can be either positive or negative. That is, they can either be added or subtracted from your account balance. Most FX brokers charge the roll, or the swap, as it is also known, at midnight GMT, and many charge 3 times the normal rate on Wednesdays to account for the weekend. This varies from broker to broker, however, and one notable exception is Oanda, who charge swap in almost real time. The pip field is the size of 1 pip in counter-currency units. For non-yen denominated FX pairs, it is normally 1/10,000th. That is 0.0001. For yen denominated FX pairs, like this one, it is 1/100th. That is 0.01. Most stocks will have this same pip value as well, as that represents 1 cent. Assets whose price has 4 or 5 digits before the decimal point, such as a CFD over an equity index, will usually have a pip size of 1. Now this pip field is important because Zorro relies on it for many calculations, such as trade profit and loss converted to units of the account currency. The pip cost field is the value of a single pip in units of the account currency, and this one is also used by Zorro to calculate trade profit and loss. Zorro handles margin calculations for us behind the scenes, but requires that we set it up correctly in the assets lists, or we can rely on Zorro to fill it in for us through our broker's API, which is much more preferable. Zorro offers us 2 methods for telling it about the margin requirements for a given position: the margin cost variable and the leverage variable. Which one is more applicable will depend on the asset type and the broker. For example, for CME futures contracts, you will typically use margin cost, while for FX, you'll often use leverage. The main difference is that margin cost is independent of the price of the instrument, while the leverage parameter incorporates the current price in determining margin requirements. So first, let's talk about the margin cost field. It refers to the margin required for holding a single lot, unit, or contract, depending on the asset type, in units of the account currency. As well as the account currency, this parameter will depend on the leverage of the account and the currency in which the asset is denominated. Some instruments, like CME futures for instance, will have different margin requirements for initial, maintenance, and overnight positions. In that case, you should enter the highest margin value to be on the safe side. If you want to use the leverage field instead, leave margin cost at 0. Of course, the leverage field denotes the leverage available for a particular instrument, and this parameter is ignored whenever margin cost is non-zero, as is the case for all these instruments here. The lot amount parameter can also be something of a source of confusion. It denotes the number of contracts or units that make up one lot of the asset. Now, this is confusing depending on the instrument type we are trading, because, for example, we don't normally think of trading stocks in terms of the number of lots to buy and sell. We think of the actual number of stocks. Well, in Zorro, the 2 terms are used interchangeably. The best way to think of lot amount is the smallest amount of an instrument that you can buy or sell with a particular broker. For stocks, that will be 1 unit. For futures, that will be 1 contract. For FX, that will typically be 1,000 units, which is 0.01 standard FX lots, where a standard FX lot consists of 100,000 units of the base currency. Some CFDs will let you trade less than 1 unit, and likewise we can also buy and sell fractions of bitcoins, for example. I know that is probably a bit confusing if you're not familiar with trading all these different asset classes, but if in doubt, the lot amount parameter will always be the smallest tradable amount of an instrument. The commission field is the commission taken by the broker for facilitating your trade. This one should be a really simple parameter, but it can actually be quite a source of confusion too. Here's what you need to know. First, the commission parameter is given in units of the account currency, and it is round turn commission, so it needs to include the costs of both opening and closing a position. For all instruments other than currencies, the commission parameter reflects the commission for opening and closing one contract or one unit. For stocks traded with interactive brokers, this will usually be 1 cent, depending on the volume traded. For futures, it will be quite a bit more than that, possibly up to several dollars for retail futures accounts. For currencies, it's the commission for opening and closing 1/10 of a standard FX lot. Remember that a standard FX lot is 100,000 units of the base currency. So for currencies, the commission parameter is also equivalent to the commission for opening and closing 1 mini lot or 10 micro lots. Usually for most brokers who charge a commission, this will be between about 0.4 and 0.8 units of the account currency. So if you have something that is one or more orders of magnitude different to this, then there's likely a mistake. Finally, the symbol parameter is one we met previously in our tour of the Zorro interface. It's an optional field, and you only need to fill it out when the symbol that appears in the Asset menu in Zorro's interface which, remember, is in turn controlled by the Names field in our Assets Fix CSV file, when those names are different to the ones your broker uses for the same instrument. When you use this field, Zorro will map the instrument name that it knows about via Assets Fix to your broker's instrument that you specified in this symbol field. You'll often use it if trading stocks with interactive brokers, because their asset names include codes for the asset type and the exchange to which your order is routed. These are really important details, but you don't want them or need to have them in your Assets drop-down menu. You'll also use this field when you trade index CFDs with Oanda, as they use different names for those instruments as well. You might also use this field when trading through an MT4 or MT5 broker, who sometimes have their own symbol names as well. Now, there's obviously a lot of information contained in these Assets List CSV files, and it might seem like a daunting task to fill these out correctly yourself. But Zorro can actually do most of the work for us. So next I'm going to show you how to harness this really nice feature of Zorro that will save you a ton of time. So if we navigate to the log folder, you'll see a special asset list with the name assets.csv. Just to reiterate, this one lives in the log folder, not the history folder like the other assets lists. And this is a really useful CSV file because Zorro automatically updates this file whenever we connect to a broker in trade mode, so long as those assets appear in our script. If they don't appear in the script, the parameters in assets.csv get replaced by whatever is in assetsfix.csv at the time. So in order to simulate your current broker, just connect to that broker with a script that loops through all the assets you're interested in. Here's a script I prepared earlier. It does nothing other than loop through some assets and print out the last closing price every minute. But that's all I need to do to update the trading parameters for the assets in that loop. That's these assets here. So let's connect that script to an Oanda account and see what happens. So here Zorro's logging into my Oanda account. And we've successfully connected. So now if I go to assets.csv, you might notice that the timestamp here has just been updated. And if I open it up, I can now see the recent trading conditions for the assets that were in my script. The others that weren't in my script were all pulled from assetsfix.csv. Now, if I want to save these parameters for use in a simulation, I simply copy this file into my history folder and rename it to something that I'll remember. In this case, I'll call it Assets FX Oanda Majors. And if I go to my history folder, there it is there. Now, that asset list is available to be accessed via script using a function called assetList. And to use that function, I simply do something like this. That line will then load those parameters that I obtained from my Oanda demo account and use those parameters when simulating whatever I want to do with this script. If I'm using Zorro S, I can also put the name of that file into the Assets field of the account CSV file. Let's take a look at that one. If I enter the name of that file here, that will then automatically select that asset list as the default for that account, which I can then select in the account field. I'll just stop trading. Which I can then select in this account field of the Zorro interface. This is a really convenient feature, but remember that it's only available for Zorro S. If I wanted to use those newly downloaded trading conditions as my default parameters, I could simply copy them into assetsfix.csv. Then Zorro would use them by default. But just remember, you need to restart Zorro if you make any changes to assetsfix.csv in order for those changes to take effect. Now, as I mentioned, what we just saw there connecting to Oanda is a super convenient way to get your broker's parameters. But unfortunately, some broker APIs don't provide all these parameters. In that case, we unfortunately need to enter them manually. A notable case of this is interactive brokers. You'll need to manually enter everything other than price and spread. Thankfully, however, many parameters are the same for many assets, meaning that you can copy and paste. For example, commission on stocks is usually 1 cent, and margin requirements are available on the Interactive Brokers website. Finally, to get you started trading a wider universe of instruments than what is in your default AssetsFix CSV file, that's the one that came with Zorro when you installed it, take a look at this file, the assets cur.csv, again in the history folder. You can see that it contains a whole bunch of FX instruments. You can simply copy this list to assetsfix.csv and restart Zorro, and you'll see that these additional assets will be added to the Assets drop-down menu. Let's do that now. I need to restart Zorro. And you can see there that now I've got all those additional assets available to me. You can add further instruments manually to Assets Fix, and in one of the videos on getting data with Zorro, I'll show you how to update that list automatically as well. Of course, for performing backtests, we need market data as well as the broker's trading parameters. In the next video, I'll show you how to get that data with Zorro. Finally, there's one new feature in development that I want to mention. This feature is only for Zorro S, not the free version. I'm using Zorro version 1.74 in this video, but from version 1.78, the assets in the drop-down menu on the Zorro interface will reflect the default asset list for the selected account. That means that these assets will reflect the default asset list from the selected account, not the default Assets Fix CSV file. But that's only for Zorro S users. Okay, that's all there is to it. You now know how Zorro simulates different brokerage trading conditions. I hope also that this video demonstrated one of the reasons Zorro is so useful for time-poor retail traders, namely that it takes care of a lot of the very important but tedious detail for us. Obviously, it's really important that our backtests and simulations are a good reflection of reality, but there is quite a lot to consider in order to get this right. If we had to do this ourselves, we would be prone to making mistakes, not to mention we'd spend a lot of our precious time on such details. Zorro really frees us up to focus on strategy research and development, while taking care of these important details for us. Once you're familiar with the way that Zorro works in this regard, you'll find it really fast and efficient to update your trading conditions, and thus ensure the accuracy of your simulations. See you in the next video.